Magnus, du, neutralize things like this.
This is honestly